My name is Becky, and I am here to talk about cyber terrorism. I chose this topic because I'm a pretty huge science fiction nerd, actually. I think science fiction is a really important medium to get people to ask three questions about technological innovations. One, how can it be used for good? Two, how can it be used for bad? And three, how do we protect it from being used for bad? I think these are questions that everybody needs to ask themselves, and the more we ask ourselves this, the less likely we are to be targets of cybercrime and cyber terrorism. The first thing that I'm going to do is disambiguate, disambiguate a little bit between three different terms: cyber warfare, cybercrime, and cyber terrorism. Cyber warfare is the use or targeting of computers or networks in a warfare attack. It's cyber attacks, but when we use this term, we generally mean between centralized powers. So, Russia, China, the United States, the United Kingdoms, that's usually who we're talking about when we use the term cyber warfare. And we are all operating offensively and defensively in cyber warfare right now. Cybercrime has a much looser definition. It is any crime that involves a computer or network. The computer could be used in the commission of the crime, or the computer can be the target. So this includes everything from using Craigslist for sex trafficking to corporate espionage to money laundering. If you could do it on the streets, by and large, you can do it online now. And cyber terrorism. All cyber terrorism is cybercrime. The difference is who's doing it and why ideologically. I'm going to use a very specific definition that I got from a Navy document because I think it has the best definition. And I should say that this is not something that's been agreed on by experts. A lot of people are still debating what the definition of this word actually is and whether or not that even matters. But for the purposes of this presentation, we are going to say that cyber terrorism is the use of computers as weapons or as targets by politically motivated internationals or subnationals groups or clandestine agents who threaten or cause violence and fear in order to influence an audience or to cause the government to change its policies. A lot of the time, we don't know that something is cyber terrorism until months into an investigation because it all looks like cybercrime at first. And it's not always easy to tell who the perpetrator was or the reasons why they're doing something. So there are three types of attacks that cyber terrorists could use. One is attack against a physical machine. This is usually actually a physical attack against a physical machine. On 9/11, when the World Trade Center and Pentagon were hit, very important databases either were damaged or were permanently lost. In the case of the Pentagon, there are global communications that were interrupted, and for the World Trade Center, financial markets weren't able to open back up for a week. So we have economic disruption there as well as communication disruption, and those were in addition to the physical attack. This is the most likely type of cyber terrorist attack that there is. The second type of attack is an electronic or an EMP attack. In 2004, the House Armed Services Committee did release a report stating that the more complicated our weapons and weapon deployment infrastructure becomes, the more likely we are to be targeted by an EMP attack, and the more likely an EMP attack can damage us. Later in the last few years, Department of Homeland Security did say that modern generation civilian communications technology is less susceptible to EMPs, but it could still be a problem. The one thing that kind of helps us in this venue right now is that there aren't a lot of organizations that are asymmetrical, or rather that are terrorist organizations that have the ability to do a widespread EMP attack against us. Even places like Russia or terrorist cells that were backed by like North Korea could only do it in a limited area. The third type of attack is a computer network attack, and this is anything that we'd basically call a cyber attack. It's disrupting the integrity or authenticity of data, it's malware and viruses, it's accessing prohibited networks through stolen credentials. And most of these attack vectors come through computer systems or software and hardware that is mismanaged, misconfigured, or lacks necessary security protocols or software. And the question is it happening now? Is cyber terrorism happening? And the answer is yes. Um, we know that they've been testing things. We know that there are rises in attacks. So from 2001 to 2002, there were 14,000 additional attacks against military networks. Um, And to put that even more perspective, in 2001, there were 40,000 attacks, and in 2002, there were 54,000 attacks. So we know that these things are happening. We don't always know who it is. I mean, some of that could be North Korea, some of that could be Al Qaeda. So, what would those three types of attacks look like? What would their goals be? Well, the four main categories are espionage, espionage, propaganda, sabotage, and economic disruption. When we're talking about sabotage, what would that look like? Well, imagine an a nuclear, biological, or chemical attack that happened in conjunction with a power grid going down because somebody hacked it. Response times would be less. There'd be more panic. You'd be trying to help people in the dark. An NBC attack that happened in conjunction with power grid failure would be a much more powerful NBC attack. Um, Both psychologically and physically and traumatically for the people involved. Second, imagine water infrastructure hacked. So, water um, processing plants are very highly specific in, they test the water a lot for a lot of different things. There's not very much that can get through our water without it being detected at the more modern plants. But if that was hacked, then of course you could poison or put a virus or something into the water that would then go to everybody's homes, thus weakening potential combatants. So those would be the types of attacks that sabotage could take. Then you have espionage, mass surveillance through the Internet of Things. Of course, it's something that they could use, hacking into cars. My car is able to parallel park itself because it uses the cameras around it, and that's linked to the steering column. So potentially, if it was hacked, they would have access to the videos, to where I was going, to how I drive, to potentially being able to take over my steering column or my brakes. And I mean, not that I think I'm a target of this, but these are types of things that could be used to cause harm or damage, violence to other people, or terror. Also, they could just listen. Again, you and I probably aren't the targets, but people that are, they could be listening through, everyone's talking about the fridges and TVs listening to them these days, but that is absolutely possible. Third is propaganda. I don't know if you guys remember the Bethnal Green students. They were five girls from London who actually ran away from home to marry terrorists in Syria. They were isolated, they were targeted, and they were recruited entirely online. So that kind of thing could happen. But there could also be more widespread propaganda. It could be used in what we call psychops, or psychological operations in warfare. Um, I should say I was in the army for 8 years, so I'm just sorry if some of these terms, I'm trying to make sure that everybody can understand them. Psychops look basically like what we did in the first Gulf War. Once we interrupted the enemy supply lines, we dropped pamphlets onto the Iraqi soldiers telling them how much we'd feed them once they surrendered, because we knew that they were hungry. And a lot of the guys that surrendered had those pamphlets on them and were asking for the food that was on them, which then was supplied to them. So if you did that in conjunction with physical attacks to the large populace, if you started popping up on people's computer screens, your V for Vendetta style, of course, you're going to create a lot more panic. And you could do sort of things like that. And then you have economic disruption. And this can take a couple forms. So terrorists could siphon money for their own banking. They could use it to launder money and keep it away from known sources. But you also have things where, like Estonia a few years ago, had its banks entirely shut down for 3 to 4 weeks. And while that didn't cause widespread harm there, on a much larger scale, it certainly could cause a panic. So, how do we protect against this? Well, number one is just the idea of top-down security. At every level, you need to make sure that your security is set, your policies are set from at every single computer station, at every single potential vector. One of the craziest stories to me is in 2003. If you guys remember the Slammer worm, it actually corrupted the control systems in a nuclear power plant for 5 hours, and I think that was in Ohio. And it was able to successfully penetrate the system because the business network, there were people in the corporate offices whose computers had connections to the internet that bypassed the control room firewall. And from there, they were able to actually get in to the nuclear power plant controls. The only thing that really kind of saves the situation is that the power plant was shut down at the time. But I mean, that just goes to show that, again, at every level, you've got to be checking those controls. That's, rule number one. And I think we all know that, especially after this class. Everything's interrelated. So it's important to protect everything because once they're into your system, they're into your system. Rule two is that if a device was out of your hands, it's not your device anymore. This is a much bigger deal, kind of, I think, for military and government agencies. The military actually uses a lot of civilian components, and that is both to get the benefits of innovation, uh, to confuse the enemy at what they're attacking, because they might not know what they're attacking, because the systems are different between one division to the next. But that does mean that, if there are flaws in that civilian hardware or if they outsourced it somewhere to another country where we have potential enemies, they could slide malware into that. And those types of things do happen. A British kid found that he could hack those Bitcoin e-wallets and then sell them. He didn't do that, but a lot of those wallets were being sold by third parties, and he just proved that these supposedly unhackable Bitcoin wallets could actually be hacked, and he could steal all your money from them. So if your wallet was in the hands of somebody else rather than just the company, you were at a potential risk. And kind of my rule three is government responsibility. And it involves us a little bit too. So currently, the United States doesn't even have a cyber czar. Trump scrapped that position after the last guy quit. I have a lot of friends in cybersecurity actually, and that's pretty much considered a bad move because this is a burgeoning field that needs direction. But the other two things are going to be deterrence and dissuasion. Deterrence is the idea of retributive strikes against whoever attacked us. That'd be kind of a military or police action. Now, dissuasion is something that we can all take part in. The first one is resilience. The first part of dissuasion is resilience. Make sure that your systems are resilient at from home to work. Make sure that everybody knows the security rules, they're adhering to them, that you're updated, that you're patched, all of that good stuff. Don't be a target. Close your target vectors as much as you can. The second part of that dissuasion is having efficient investigative apparatuses for cybercrime. We need better cyber forensics, and we should be urging our government, local, state, and upwards to put into place systems that make it easy for the FBI to come in and talk or to share information across things because we actually see that a lot in revenge porn or exploitation of minors. That we know that these videos happened in one state, but then the perpetrators in another state, and then you have it across state and it's through the internet. And there is a lot of confusion there. And a lot of local governments don't have what they need to do cyber forensics. So we need to have better communication and systems set up to protect us all from both cybercrime and cyber terrorism. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to email me or message me on ESI. I'll respond. I actually think cybercrime's super fascinating. Cyber terrorism, like I said, is just cybercrime that kind of has more of an ideological purpose. So I hope that you guys have a great finals week and a great next semester. Thanks. Bye. I had to get back to the video to close it. So awkward staring. Okay.